What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the Magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website, but this time we have an annual tradition instead. So first of all, happy holidays, and hopefully you are enjoying them. Hopefully they're going well for you. This week we have part one of our top 10 MTG stories of the year 2018. This is something we've done for the last 2 years as well, and this week we are going to be going backwards and going through numbers 10 through 6. So, without further ado, we've done the compilation stuff in the past, so let's just get right into it. Our number 10 story of the year is from Rivals of Ixalan. It is the premier story for the set of stories for Rivals of Ixalan. It is The Flood by the R&D narrative team. So this actually, I'm pretty sure, was the first main Magic story of the year that we got in 2018.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, Burn, which was a fantastic story in 2017.
One of our favorites, probably of all time.
Right. That was one of the first few in 2017. So there you go. It's just another tradition of, you know,
the first story being
strong.
a knockout.
Yeah, starting very, very strong. So to remind everybody about this one, just so you don't have to go back and read each and every one of them, this starts the Rivals of Ixalan story. So it starts with the Golden City of Araska finally being revealed. The thing that all of the main characters and even secondary characters had sought and hoped for throughout the Ixalan stories was they wanted to find the Golden City. All the 4 different tribes on Ixalan wanted to control the Golden City. Well, now it had been revealed thanks to Kumena. And so in the beginning we see Kumena and taking control, and then you have Vona and Mavrin Fane coming in and taking control from him. And so you can see it's kind of a King of the Hill type situation where it's like, you know, well, you were there first, but now we're there, and now we control it, and we'll talk about that more in coming stories, I'm sure. And then, as these stories kind of tended to do, we would start with secondary characters and then move to the main characters in JaAR and Vraska. And we start where we left off. JaAR had fallen when the Golden City revealed itself. JaAR fell, hit his head pretty badly, bleeding quite a bit. And we get a story spotlight from this with all of JaAR's memories from his past rushing back to him. First of all, his memories that he lost in the fight against Nicol Bolas, when Bolas put him to Ixalan and he lost all of his memories, and we got JaAR alone out of that, which was definitely a different caliber of story from this one.
Yeah, not in a good way.
No. And it gave us the opportunity to then also see JaAR remember his way past that he lost during his fight with Alhammaret.
Right.
So now he's remembering...
So he's remembering memories that he hasn't had in... Do we know even the amount of time?
I mean, basically since we've known him as a character outside of Magic Origins.
So, like, possibly decades.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He hasn't had this information in his head, like in his consciousness.
Right.
It was like in his subconscious somewhere.
Yeah.
And he didn't remember any of this stuff. And getting all these memories back made him so much more powerful.
That's right. That's right. And because he remembered his training under Alhammaret. And sure, it may have been somewhat abusive, but it was training with his telepathy and, you know, and then the fight with Alhammaret that ensues, and he now remembers all of that. He remembers Vryn, which now opens possibilities of us returning to that plane at some point with JaAR remembering it, and all of these other options and possibilities. But more importantly, with that happening and JaAR remembering all these things, he's not just remembering them. JaAR is an illusion mage. He is using his illusions to project these memories physically above him, in front of him, what have you.
Not on purpose.
No, because he's not conscious at this point, basically. And Vraska is seeing all of this. And so for his older memories of like him as a child and stuff, I mean, it's somewhat personal, but otherwise that's not a huge deal.
Right.
But then you get into other types of memories. And for example, you get into, as I mentioned, you have Jace's relationship with Alhammaret and his original thought of his relationship, but more importantly, his realization of that relationship and realizing that it was not a healthy one.
Right.
But also then Vraska sees things like when Tezzeret was torturing Jace and the things that Jace had to go through against the likes of Tezzeret in those fights. And I mean, from a story perspective, that was really important for Vraska because old Amnesia Jace, whom she had met here on Ixalan, was a good friend to her and was treating her well and was doing all of these things for her. And she was beginning to like him so much so that she was able to trust him enough to reveal her own history of trauma to him. And he did what we said and we believed was the appropriate thing in thanking her for being willing to share that information. And now Vraska sees that even Jace that she hated, despised, what have you, even he had a history that was somewhat similar to her, or at least a history that he could understand part of what she was saying to him.
Right.
And what she had been through.
Right, which is, kind of a contrast, because not only did she hate him, but he hated her, basically. There was sort of a prejudice there, I guess you could say. And
well, it wasn't unfounded, though. I mean, they had reasons for disliking one another based on their interactions on Ravnica.
Okay, but you add that and a sort of prejudice because Vraska's race, basically, was sort of looked down upon by the culture on Ravnica, as well as all of the instances that happened with them specifically to get to an even worse point. And then you add that in with him getting all of his memories back, the memories that he didn't even have when he was on Ravnica, and all the powers that he got from that, and then the relationship that he accumulated with Vraska, and all of that stuff added up together created a completely different man. I mean, this story, even if you don't take into account the good writing, and it was good writing for the most part, if you only take it at its baseline, that it basically just was sort of one of the pinnacle type stories that changed people's minds about who Jace was as a person. And that is a meaningful story, at least to me, because I never liked Jace before the Ixalan stories. And, then we got to kind of see him becoming a different guy, but we didn't get to see him make any decisions about the kind of guy he was going to be until the later Ixalan stories and the Rivals of Ixalan stories, where we really got to see him make pointed decisions that we kind of even didn't really see him get to make when he was on Ravnica or like with Liliana, because he was in that sort of abusive relationship with her to a point where decisions that would normally have been his were really just hers, because she was manipulating him to make certain decisions. And so now we kind of got to see him be the man Jace should have been all along. Right. And so that, at least for me, was a great a great story to see, because we got to see Jace being an important character, being a real character, instead of such a static one, which is how I always felt he was in the past. So
yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Liliana. The other thing was there was that bit of an awkward moment of Jace projecting a memory of he and Liliana, and it was a somewhat intimate moment. I mean, they weren't, they were half clothed, and they were kind of talking with one another. I believe it was on Ravnica, and you see a little bit of the way that Lily treated Jace, and now Vraska sees that, And when Jace kind of comes to towards the end of this story, he now knows that Veraska saw those things. And so there's that moment, though, where even Veraska, they're both kind of feeling each other out. Like, okay, Veraska's like, this is the Jace that I dreaded seeing, that I was angry with when I first saw him until I realized he didn't know who I was. But now he's back, and now he's the villain, right, in her eyes. And same with him. It's like, this is Veraska. I need to be careful. You know, she could kill me with a glance. And they kind of feel each other out a bit and then kind of fall back into, okay, we are friends.
Right.
Things have changed here, and we're okay together. For at least for then. And so that was really nice to see, because it didn't mean that Jace got all of his memories back, and so everything was wiped out from all the Ixalan stories. So that was nice to see.
And the other thing too is that from this story, you really got to feel that element of shame that comes with people finding out about any abusive relationships that you've been in, whether romantic or otherwise, and sort of like, he was lucky to a point because he didn't have to vocalize that to her, but on the other side of that same coin, he was that much less lucky, because then he couldn't tell her that story in the way that he wanted to tell her that story. She just flat out saw it.
Right. Which is possibly better, though, because then it means that she saw it unfiltered.
Right. He's not fabricating things. He's not lying about things to protect his own insecurities or whatever.
Right.
And so it's that much more raw. It's that much more real. But we do get to see that element of shame, and because the first thing he said, "Oh, you saw that?" Yeah.
Yeah. So that's number 10. Also, if I didn't mention earlier, I believe I did, but this was the Flood was by the R&D narrative team. I think I said that, but in case I didn't, want to give credit where credit is due. So, moving on to number 9. Number 9, we have from the Guilds of Ravnica stories, Death's Precious Moments. And all of the Ravnica stories, Guilds of Ravnica, excuse me, were by Nikki Drayden. And so, this one, it's the first of our Ravnica stories, so I'll say it now. One of the reasons why the Ravnica stories were so good is because it was something that we had asked for a very long time. Give us other characters. Write other characters. It doesn't need to be every story, it's a new character and things like that. We understand that there's the Gatewatch and there's a reason for all of this, but let us see...
And there can be a through line of characters and sections of stories or what have you.
Right. But we've harped on this a million times. Hour of Devastation in 2017 did such a good job of giving us tertiary characters like Hepatra and Jeru and others that, Ronus, that were so fully fleshed out, even just within one story, that you started caring about them immediately. If they survived by the end, then you wanted to see what happened with them next. Like, I'm looking forward to going back to Amonkhet because I get to see how all of these characters are doing now.
Right, but those stories were great not just from a characterization standpoint. They used that characterization to explain the world.
Yes.
And that is a great way of telling a story. And because, like you always say, it shows instead of tells.
Correct.
What the world is actually about.
Right. And so, to bring that back to Guilds of Ravnica, with the Guilds of Ravnica stories, we're not getting the main characters. One of them, in fact, this one that we're talking about, mentioned Veraska, but she barely spoke, right? It wasn't from her perspective. It wasn't from a character that we will likely ever see again. This was a Crawl, one of the bug people from Mazarek's people. And this was the story of a general guild member living his day-to-day life arguably. I mean, this was a little bit more of a fantastic situation, but at the same time, there was an elven lich who was coming to power and wanted a servant, a right-hand man, so to speak, or woman. And so they held a tournament. And that tournament, this Krall was lucky enough to enter that tournament. And so one of the things that was really important was, and was with a lot of these stories, there was an aspect of relatability there. We are talking about a bug person, right? A humanoid bug character personified with thoughts and speech and etc., hopes, dreams. And yet, I'm sure that there are people who could relate to this story, at least part of it, because you had this bug creature going from a suburban lifestyle, or a rural lifestyle, more like, to the big city of Ravnica, right? Going from the outskirts to the big city and being so far in over their head.
All right.
So far in. And when we hear about their childhood or their upbringing, there is so much flavor there that it is disgusting. Because they are a member of the Golgari, and so the Golgari are all about rot and death and reuse and recycling. And so with that, you need a little bit of gross. And you have bug people. Bugs are disgusting. There are many people who are very afraid of bugs for whether they're relevant reasons or not. You know, sometimes it's a phobia, but bugs are gross. A lot of bugs are disgusting. And so this story gave you so much flavor. Do you want to talk about your feelings with the flavor of him talking about his mother and how much he loved his mother in this story?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to things like death or really kind of anything grotesque, it's really hard to gross me out. Right? I mean, you can attest to that.
Oh yeah, agreed.
For the most part.
Yeah, I usually get there before her.
I usually don't get grossed out by just sort of random descriptions of things. But I was grossed out during this story.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Like, eat out all the innards of your mom so that you can use her exoskeleton as your home. Like, okay.
And still speak about her with such love and reverence, and talk about how much she cared for them and fought off enemies and combatants and intruders and things like that before they thanked her by eating her from the inside out.
Well, you talked about flavor, but like, it's also clear that the author did their research. You know, they looked into how bugs actually behave.
Parasites,
in the wild,
etc. Yeah.
You know, and it, you know,
bugs are gross.
I'll use the example of, you know, lots of mothers eat their young. It's not often the other way around, but it is sometimes for sure. So it was really cool to have that extreme description that was so creative and obviously researched and just fun.
Yeah.
Like, flavor is kind of those two things, you know?
Yes.
The intense good characterization and research along with the fun.
Right.
That's really what flavor is, like a marriage of those two.
And it's so funny because you if you want an award for the worst transition on JaAR in 2018, here we are. Speaking of not fun, there was also a metaphor that was used in this story, or a metaphor that kind of ran throughout this story that I really appreciated, and I feel like it needed to be called out. I mean, we called it out in the video itself, but to talk about it now because of how good the story was for being able to include positive things and fun things and good flavor, but also negative things. Negative real-world things like racism. Mm-hmm. And this was a Krall bug character. As we learned in Pride of the Krall, many, many months ago, over a year, I'm certain, we learned about Mazarek. And we learned about how the Krall were looked down on by the rest of the Golgari. And including this elven lich, right? The main character in this story succeeded in the task that was presented to them by this elven lich. They brought back the fungus that they needed to bring back because they had the knowledge of the different types of fungi on Ravnica and how to appropriately handle them and not die from touching them or being near them or breathing them in, and knew what they did and how to like almost use them as a weapon as well in certain cases. And so they bring it back and they present it to the elven lich, and then another character gets there right after them. Well, that other character gets to split the position with the crawl, even though that's not how it was supposed to work in the first place. But then the elven lich didn't have to just have a crawl who they saw clearly as a lesser being. And so you get to see that aspect of racism there, where this character succeeded, was used their knowledge and their abilities. They didn't cheat, they didn't lie, they didn't steal. They used their abilities to the best of their ability and succeeded in the task that was presented to them, and they still lost to someone who did steal, because he ended up the human, I believe it was a human, but the other character killed one of the other crawl, took all of their items.
Oh, I thought he was also elven, but...
Oh, maybe. But whatever it was, a crawl was killed, his fungi were taken, and he showed up second, and yet still got half of the responsibilities that were afforded to that position, but really more than half. And the crawl main character kind of got the short end of the stick, but was then redeemed by the end of the story in being able to use that fungus, use his knowledge and his abilities to uncover a plot to unseat Varaska as the guild leader, and saved her life. Because one of those pieces of fungi or mushrooms or whatever was attempting to be used, or was going to be used
to assassinate her,
kill Varaska. And this crawl comes up and attempts to, as they are dying from falling on their own instance of one of the mushrooms that they had, they're now being killed by this mushroom. They finally get to where Varaska is. Mazarek is with her, and they're told, don't let her have that thing or whatever, and is stopped. The assassination plot is foiled, and this character dies in the process.
Right.
And yet, because the Golgari are all about rebirth, reuse, recycling, and this is literally called death's precious moments, and death is not the end, and even in death you are useful, they are able to be resurrected. It was such a flavorful story.
Right.
It was such a redeeming story. You had positive aspects, you had negative aspects.
Was it you or was it me who mentioned the dynamite guy from Lost?
I believe that was you, but Arnst is who you're thinking of. Dr. Arnst.
That's it.
Yes.
Arnst. It reminded me of Arnst, where he's the one who knows how to carefully handle the dynamite so they don't all explode, and then in the end, he's the only one who dies from it.
Spoilers for that super old show, I guess. But yes, exactly. And so, for all of those reasons, that's why this, Death's Precious Moments by Nikki Drayden from Guilds of Ravnica, is our number 9. For number 8, we're not going too far. Once again, from the Guilds of Ravnica stories, we have Testing the Dark Waters, once again, by Nikki Drayden. So this one, again, more examples. There were 5 different stories because there were 5 different guilds. So that was the Golgari story. This one was the Izzet story, or the Izzet-centered story. Now the reason, well, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons that this was a little bit higher than the last one is because Ravnica has 10 guilds that operate within it. And so it's typical, or in my mind, it would make sense to be typical to walk down the street and encounter members of many different guilds along your process.
Right.
But the last story really only focused on the Golgari, and that's not bad, obviously. It still made our number 9. But here in number 8, we had it was an Izzet-centered story. And yet it started with our main character, the Izzet scientist, in the sewers. Well, who's going to be in charge of the sewers? The Golgari. And so she has a Golgari guide with her, showing her the sewers. The other thing is, I will shout out Nikki Drayden. Following her on Twitter was quite interesting when she shared a story, an actual news story of a fatberg in England that they were able to break up in the sewers.
Ew, what?
Oh yeah, legit.
I thought this was like a fun, creative thing that she made up.
Nope, real.
Ew.
Yeah, oh yeah, real disgusting. And if you don't get what a fatberg is, it is like an iceberg of fat. It like stops up the drains by like gathering on.
That is just gross.
Not really proving that it's difficult to gross you out, but I assure you it is.
Right.
But yeah, I thought that was hilarious that she shared that. She was like, "See, wasn't kidding," and it was the story about the fatberg. So yeah, props once again. Speaking to Nikki Drayden's ability to do research and use real world elements in her stories, that's really something
really cool.
to, yeah. Now, a different word that you used for this story was this.
Whimsy, yes. I just felt like there was a lot, you know what, and I feel like it was a through line for all of Nikki Drayden's stories that she wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Just a level of whimsy that the other stories from other sets just, whether they on purpose didn't go there or whether they, it just, and I don't know if she was told, hey, you can have this level of whimsy because of the fact that it's, the guilds and we're trying to, go a different way with it or whatever. But it felt so much more fun. These stories had fun in them that other stories just don't have. The other stories tend to be very serious. And that's a good thing because a lot of times it makes those stories very good. And I think the fact that these weren't as serious might be part of the reason why they're lower on the list than some of the others.
Maybe.
Because they didn't feel as important and impactful.
Well,
Because of the whimsy. But the whimsy made them so much more creative, so much more fun to read, so much more just, it was just such a breath of fresh air.
Well, and you said it made you care about the characters that much more as well. Yeah. Which is true. And I will say, you may have the opportunity for that whimsy because of the fact that there isn't as much, like, multiverse threatening event.
Right. At least not yet.
Right. Well, right. And
It'll get there.
Right, but I think that's the reason why we got these.
Okay.
Is because you have these all-powerful, or not any more all-powerful, but very powerful planeswalkers showing up on this plane that's full of people who are just, some of them, just trying to live their damn lives.
Right.
And in the last story, we had, the country kid moving to the city. In this story, the relatability was for anyone, I think, in the workforce today or newly entering the workforce today, is you have this idea of struggling with advancement. And even if you have a really good idea, it doesn't matter. It's more about the bottom line and the status quo. And maybe I'm showing my bias. Maybe that's not everyone, so I apologize for painting a broad brush. That's not really fair. But I feel like there are a lot of people, especially people who would read the Magic stories, who would be able to relate to that and wishing that they could just go off on their own. You have knowledge, you have abilities, and wanting to be able to go off and handle things yourself because you know how to do these things. You shouldn't have to be beholden to somebody who may not understand as well as you do, but they're the one with the money, so they're the one who is going to pay you to do things maybe not in the way that you know is the most efficient.
Right.
And
or humane.
Yes,
even.
yes. And if that's not something that's relatable to you, I'm sure it's relatable to someone that you know.
Right.
Because like I said, I don't ever want to speak in absolutes like that. So I do apologize for saying it in that way. Because I don't think it's everyone, but it is, I would, at least for the circles that I run in, it is a majority of people, my age and in my I guess, area and socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we personally have a friend who's a scientist who works very hard to try and prove theories and things like that, and so there's a lot of work that goes into proving these theories, and they're never really proven because it's kind of this sort of never-ending struggle of trying to advance science,
right.
And in the end, if it does get proven, then they've advanced science, but then they'll just move to the next thing that needs to be proven. Mm-hmm. So it's really just kind of like this struggle that will just always be.
Well, and we've heard stories, I mean, you know people, I'm sure you've heard, and if you haven't, I'm sure you could look up. Science research these days, people struggle for funding. They struggle for, because it has to be something that matters to someone that has money to fund you. And so...
And you need a lot of funding to do research on things that you can't prove are true, which is why you're doing research.
Right.
But that's such a risk for an investor that it's so difficult to get that funding. Right.
So, like we said, real world elements. But to bring it back to Ravnica and fantasy elements and things like that, you also had, which I really appreciated, we talked about this at the top of talking about this story, you had the mix of other guild members and other guild influences as well. And so it was an Izzet story. There was a Golgari guide in the beginning because they were in the sewers. Then, when our main character gets an assistant, that assistant turns out to be a Dimir agent. So now you have 3. And then when our main character falls on hard times, she goes and goes to the Civic and gets experimented on and lies about, having not been exposed to whatever it was that she was exposed to. So she ended up being mutated, ends up in the sewers fighting her Dimir, assistant and releasing the monster within her as she, so put it because she was mutating, which was a cool ending to the story. But like I said, the thing that stood out to me was the ability to so seamlessly add in all of those different parts, and I didn't think that they felt forced, where it was like, hey, Nikki, try to fit as many guilds as you can into this story, okay, and then she put 4 in 1. This is it scientist's day-to-day life, and she happened to run into 3 different guilds besides her own in a given, whatever week span or however long this story spanned for. But the amount of time that we were with her, we still got to see all those other guilds, which I thought was a testament to how good the story was, aside from its just massive amount of real world relatability, which is either a good or a bad thing. I mean, obviously we think it's good enough to put it on our list, but maybe for those of you that come to read fantasy to get away from the troubles of your job day to day, if this reminded you of that, maybe this wasn't the best getaway for you. But to me, that I thought that was really cool.
It was good. I felt like it still had that Ernst element a little bit.
Yep.
Of just working so hard in this one thing and then kind of having it come back to bite ya.
Yes. Exactly. No, absolutely.
It just kind of goes back to that sort of age-old story of like, the more you meddle in things, the worse the meddling that you did to affect those things then affects you back.
Yeah.
And from personal experience, I have attempted to learn from that. But yeah, I mean, we see that in stories, across every genre. Where someone who's particularly meddlesome and whether it's a positive or a negative thing in the moment, it usually ends up kind of turning the tables on them and making what they were trying to accomplish end up, completely in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And then also hurting them that much more after that, so.
So, if it needs to be said, for all of those reasons, That is why Testing the Dark Waters from Guilds of Ravnica by Nikki Drayden was our number 8. Now moving on to number 7. We go back. I promise it's not all this, but we go back to Rivals of Ixalan. So we had Rivals and then Guilds, and now we're back to Rivals. But here we are, back to Rivals of Ixalan. Our number 7 is Glimpse the Far Side of the Sun, once again, as we mentioned before, by the R&D narrative team. So this was a story about Watley.
Right.
At least it started about Watley, because as I said with the rival stories, it was the secondary characters and then Jason Veraska, but it's on our list because of what it did for Watley, because of the discussions that were had with and between Watley and, in this case, Angrath. But some of the earlier Watley stories on Ixalan, or from the Ixalan set of stories, were not good. They weren't, and it was upsetting because Watley seemed to be such a cool character. People really loved the Dino tribe and the Sun Empire in general, and Watley being the planeswalker from that, a Boros planeswalker, you know, you had that element, and yet the stories that we saw her in weren't impressive.
Right.
And then we got Glimpse the Far Side of the Sun.
Right.
So why?
That's where we learned that Watley matters and how. That's where we got to see. I mean, my favorite thing about this story was, you know, just there were so many great lines in this story that were just so poignant.
Yes.
From a social standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, from a, you know,
I would say even from an age disparity standpoint,
just
experience,
like, right,
you know,
just
gap.
so many things, like all the humanities, and you know, just certain points that were made just really transcend time, you know, and they will be forever poignant points.
Yeah.
You know, and they always were.
Yeah.
You know, all the way back to the beginning of humans telling stories to one another.
Yes.
So that's really the reason why I wanted to have this story here. But the other aspects that made it good were definitely the fact that we got a story about Watley that was actually good.
Yeah.
We got a story, because I feel like when we had the other Watley stories, I feel like instantly people were complaining about them.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling correctly, social media was kind of having a field day and saying, well, Watley this and Watley that, like, you made us think she was going to be so great, and then you stomped on it or whatever. And then we got this story, which was kind of like its redemption. You know, kind of like saying, no, guys, look, like, this story will show you
who Watley is, that she matters, why she matters, and make you care about her. And it accomplished all of that. Yeah, and I think it did a really good job of kind of starting off doing that by showing us her as a child. And her inquisitive nature, and she's like speaking with, you know, in a class, and she's speaking with her teacher, and to the point where she's like kind of schooling her teacher. She's like, why can't I just be curious about something? You know, why do I have to be shut down for asking these questions? Whereas all the other students seem to be willing to just allow it to be brushed off and, you know, move on with their day. And there, maybe not everyone, but I feel like that happens in school, where you have some students who, depending on the class, depending on their age and their grade level, there are some students who aren't necessarily interested in learning that particular subject, or maybe they're not really feeling the lesson or the teacher or whatever, and so they kind of tune out or even actively disrupt to take away from everyone else experiencing it. And yet there are other students who are actually genuinely interested, and they may get looked down on for that interest. They may get looked down on for wanting to succeed and wanting to do well, and maybe that's not cool or what have you. And don't read too much into it. I'm not wholly speaking from personal experience here, although I mean, maybe to a degree, but not like, oh, Joe's childhood was clearly marred with, like, no, you know, it happened, and I saw it happen to me. I saw it happen to others as well, because sometimes, you know, that particular subject isn't really for everyone. And if you're forced to take it because you have to, then you're going to get that to happen sometimes. And and yet the students that care are the ones that the teacher might actually be able to teach above and beyond the lesson that they're teaching in that exact moment.
Well, you say that in kind of a positive way, like teachers like doing that. From my experience, because in a lot of classrooms, I was the kid who kind of saw things from a more creative, out of the box, maybe even out of the universe kind of standpoint, where nobody knew what the heck I was talking about, and just and I tended to see the bigger picture, but not the details and stuff like that, which is why I'm not good at memorizing things, but concepts I'm good at. So a lot of times in classrooms that I was in, the teacher would ask a certain question, or we would have to write an essay or something like that, and they would respond with, well, you didn't do what I asked. Well, you didn't answer the question that was presented. And a lot of times I said, wait, no, I did. It's just that, I saw this over here and assumed that it circled you back over here.
Right, that's what you focused on.
Right,
kind of a thing.
And so I wrote about this because to me, when I look at this, it makes me know this,
right.
All the way over here. And they're like, no, but you were supposed to stay over here.
Yeah.
So... And maybe that comes from being more of a creative-minded person, or maybe it just comes from being an inquisitive kind of person, like you said before. I don't know. Maybe I'm just nuts. But in any case, I feel like for the most part, the first time I actually encountered teachers that appreciated that. Was in college.
That's more what I remember your stories from college telling me about your instances of going to these courses that you were paying to attend and caring, whereas the other students were like, oh cool, it's snowing, we don't have class, and you're like, no, I came here to learn.
Like I just drove 45 minutes to get here because I really want to learn this, and I paid for this class, and it's a snow day, great.
Yeah, whereas other students seem to be doing it because it was what they did. Yeah. So that's an interesting point, and yet somewhat contrasting that in this story, you had Watley doing that in the beginning and being that kind of an inquisitive child, but then towards the end or later on with Watley talking to Angrath is kind of explaining life to Watley in a way that she never really learned it.
Right.
And Watley is saying, well, to Angrath, well, you don't understand, the Sun Empire is this way and this is how it is. And Angrath's like, yeah, to you.
Right.
To you, this is how it is.
Right.
That's not how it is to everyone.
That's the truth because of the box that you were brought up in. But, that box is a tiny box inside the whole universe, which has, a million planes and figure it out.
Right.
So it was like another situation, kind of like what we saw with Ugin talking to Nicol Bolas, back and forth saying, look, like, you need to realize that stuff is bigger than, this narrow ridiculousness that is in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. So it really did, because we also didn't get a lot of info on Angrath, and in this one we heard a bit more about him, and we get a little bit more in some other stories as well, but Angrath really being able to just be there as the guy who trained Watley in understanding the world or the multiverse outside of Ixalan was a pretty cool thing. Obviously, as with any planeswalker that we see, I would have loved more information on Angrath because he seems like such an awesome character. And again, I look forward to seeing Angrath again in the future so we can get more of that. But regardless, that was a really cool moment and interaction between those two in this story, which is one of the many reasons why Glimpse the Far Side of the Sun was our number 7. And so finally for this video, again, tune in next week for 5 through 1, but for this video, our number 6 is from Dominaria, a new one for this list, a newcomer. Return to Dominaria, episode 12 by Martha Wells. So now episode 12 is the finale of the Dominaria stories, which frankly, and we've said this before, this is not a surprise, overall were not good.
Right.
Now, don't get that wrong. Overall, stories not being good doesn't mean that individual stories within them could be good. But 1 of 12 or 2 of 12 being good does not mean that all of them were good. It means that those individual stories were.
Yeah, the problems that we had with the Dominaria stories was, I think for the most part, just the fact that it took so long to get to the climax of the story.
Because many characters were being introduced here and there and everywhere, and because we needed to be either reintroduced to them or for many readers, I'm sure, just straight introduced to them, despite the fact that this was a plane with such history attached to it. Plus, it was, to go a little meta on it, it was a transition time. We've talked about that a million times. We are here to talk about this particular story. Mm-hmm. And this was, again, the finale, the closing story for Dominaria, for Return to Dominaria. And one thing that Martha Wells did throughout these stories was make it Liliana's story. It was about her. It was about her changing, finding and fighting her last demon. Will she succeed? Won't she succeed? Is she going to get the help of Gideon? Why did Nissa go away? Now Jace is back and he's treating her like garbage. And so throughout these stories, you had all of this. And now for the finale, right? It's not higher on our list, right? It is number 6. It is the end of this first half. It is not higher on the list because we took it as a bit of a knock that there were so many name drops in this one. And it felt like they were trying to shoehorn these name drops in there. Whereas some people may have been like, yes, give me every legend possible. And it's like, but you're not, you're just giving the name of that legend. You're not
actually
giving anything else.
them into the story and making it worthwhile.
That's right. It was a nice Easter egg for us who knew Radha as a character to see her and to see her throw a teardrop-shaped blade, which we know she made herself. Right. That was not discussed in the story, but she did, and she was cool, and she helped out Gideon and Chandra. But
it would have been nice to have a story that actually incorporated, I don't know. I'll stop talking because it's making me mad.
Right. And so you had Radha, you had Urgaros showing up as an enemy randomly where Liliana's like, oh, I'll take control. Oh, he's empty. Urgaros, the empty one.
Right.
Ta-da!
Not right.
And then Muldrotha, Slimefoot.
You literally wrote the card title. Congrats, Yeah,
Slimefoot is talking to the Saprolings or whatever, and Muldrotha comes up to fight Yargle. And so all of those names that I just mentioned, it hurt this story a bit.
Right.
To talk about the positives of the story and why it made it on the list at all.
Yes.
Because clearly it's a list of 10. Right. And it's a list of 10, and clearly all 12 didn't make it. Whether, that's not a spoiler at all for next week. All 12 did not make it on the list. But we had the final demon, Belzenlach. Mm-hmm. He shows up. He's super cocky. He's very powerful because he is able to beat Gideon, even kind of in the one-on-one scenario, even though Gideon had the Black Blade Reforged, which was, I kind of went into this going, oh, well, the Black Blade card, the flavor text references Gideon. We know Gideon's going to get that sword, and so now it's going to be Gideon's job to beat Belzenlach. It's going to be him helping Liliana, even though we know that their relationship is somewhat tumultuous, and it's going to be great. That's a good ending to the story and how Liliana's final demon is defeated. Nope, Belzenlach beats Gideon. And Gideon drops, it doesn't kill him, obviously, but he drops the sword. And then Liliana picks up the sword and is able to deal the finishing blow, which was a surprise. It kind of came out of nowhere. It makes sense, again, because it's Liliana's demon.
Right.
And so she has now defeated all of her demons herself.
Right.
But
and that's a great metaphor regardless.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, even just the phrase, she defeated her demons.
Right. Because realistically, no one can defeat your demons but you.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, you can have a big, strong guy come in with, you know, swinging a sword, but you're not really going to save, you know, you have to save yourself.
Yep. And so we had that, but also, again, talking about secondary or tertiary characters that are going to stay on that plane because they're not planeswalkers. You had the Weatherlight crew reform, which was cool for these stories, that they got the Weatherlight back and Joyra is the captain again, and you have cool new characters that still have ties to older characters like Shauna and Wrath. And you have, you know, fun fan favorites like Slimefoot.
Right.
And you get to see these characters and see them interacting with one another throughout these 12 stories. But also you find out now in this story that they're going to stay together. Right. There are still Cabal members to take care of kind of across the plane. And so they agree to stay with one another. And so that means that it would allow us as readers to, again, as I mentioned with Hour of Devastation, be interested in returning. To see these characters again, even if, and I'm sure it will, but even if it doesn't in any way pertain to some planeswalker going to that plane. Obviously it will, because otherwise why are we there? What story is being told? And what planeswalker cards are going to be present? But regardless, you have these other characters that we can now look forward to seeing. And this story did a good job of closing that arc, but leaving that gap. Leaving it open enough. I was
just about to say, the reason why I really wanted this story on this list is because regardless of the fact that we were sitting there for so many stories in these episodes of the Dominaria stories, we were sitting there for so many stories going, okay, are they going to get to anything? Yep. Are they going to get to anything? Are they going to get to anything? Seriously? Come on. And then finally when they did, it was really, really great, I feel like. And then this story being the finale actually did a great job of taking all of those loose ends that seemed to be everywhere and tying them into a neat bow that still allowed us to care about what was going to happen next, but actually closed it out. Didn't leave it open-ended. Like a lot of other stories have in the past.
Yes. Or crammed it all in the last one.
Right, just sort of rushed through the end so that it was so anticlimactic that you were like, okay, why did I care about these characters in the first place? Because obviously they didn't matter. Because what happened to them in the end wasn't something that you as the writers made matter. But this story did it right.
Right.
And so this one made it on the list.
Right. And to go along with what Amy said, the reason I wanted it on this list, above and beyond all the other reasons that we mentioned, because it wasn't not because of those, but the main thing for me was, as I said, this was Liliana's story arc. And at the end of this story, we see Liliana joining with Gideon, Teferi, because first of all, Teferi takes his oath in this story. That's something. And we don't know what the repercussions of that will be because we haven't gotten there yet, at least at the time of recording. So that's something that's cool.
And that was a portion of the story that was kind of rushed through, if I recall.
Yes, but because it was told from Liliana's perspective, but it was important because we know what the oaths are like, and we've seen the card, and so we see what he says. So Liliana being told
so many oaths already. That
so Liliana being far away is like, oh yeah, Teferi's oathing. Okay, and that's fine because otherwise you, at the end of this very long, longer story, closing it out, now we have to stop and be like, this is who we are. This is who the Gatewatch are. Do you want to join the Gatewatch? Oh, you do? Well, you have to take an oath. Pick something to say, and then he says it. And they did, so I thought that was okay. I thought they did a good job with that, of being like, yep, he oathed, yep, you knew it was coming, so yep, there it is.
Yeah, I just think that there was a little bit of like a devaluing of the oath from that.
Maybe. I mean, it's seemingly the last one, because the Gatewatch story is over at this point. But the reason that Liliana is now leaving with Gideon and Teferi and Karn and Jaya and going to Ravnica to join up, and Jace and Chandra, etc., to fight Nicol Bolas. She has been redeemed. Jace doesn't think so.
Right.
But she's been redeemed. Gideon helped her. Gideon chose her over Jace in these stories.
Which is pretty shocking.
Yes. And so, and Liliana even develops somewhat of a relationship with Joyra, which was cool. We enjoyed reading about that.
Yeah.
And so you have Liliana as a character who originally, when we saw her join the Gatewatch and Eldritch Moon, was like, these fools are going to help me accomplish my goal, and then I'm going to use them and then run away.
Right. The only person that she really had a relationship with was Jace.
Yes. And even was using him. And she knew that.
Right.
She knew she was using all of them. And yet, at the end of this story, that's not what we saw.
She had relationships with so many people.
Right.
And we got to see a little bit of the relationship that she had with her brother. I mean, we just saw her character grow by leaps and bounds.
And this was her culmination. This was the finale of the story where she was redeemed. And it was amazing. And all these planeswalkers are planeswalking with her, joining with her as a team to go to Ravnica. And she's finally redeemed. The story is over. And then Bolas shows up.
Right.
And it's just that moment of...
Just to rip that rug out from under her.
And again, you knew it was coming because you knew it was on the card. In Bolas's clutches was a thing. But Liliana was redeemed. Like, it was her moment.
Right.
And it was taken away from her by Bolas, by this situation. And it just... It adds another layer because now Jace is in all those planeswalkers' ears on Ravnica saying, see... She abandoned you. I knew she was nothing. Mm-hmm. She was worth nothing. And yet, it was the only time where she was actually worth anything.
Right.
And yet, it makes it look like Jace was correct.
But, and like I said before, meddling comes back to bite you.
And so...
You're going to be a manipulative person who, manipulates people and uses them to your own advantage. And you're going to... meddle with other people's lives, then eventually, when you actually deserve something good to happen to you, it's not.
Yeah. And again, with this, we have not seen the repercussions of it yet, but we will when we see Liliana next. We will see what comes of that in the Ravnica stories. But all of those reasons are why this Return to Dominaria, episode 12, was our number 6. Now, as we said, this was 10 through 6. Next week, we will have 5 through 1 in that order. This, I didn't say it up at the top because I partially forgot, but also partially, hopefully, I didn't need to. These are our opinions.
Right.
These are definitively the 10, and there's no question. If you have a difference of opinion, if you think that some of our stories that we mentioned didn't deserve to be on the list, should have been higher, should have been lower, let us know your list of 10 through 6 in the comments below.
Yeah.
Think about it, because we took some time, we thought about these, etc. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I do want to give a quick shout out because I am on my way out at this point to go join our good friend Dave at DAM314 on Twitch, twitch.tv/DAM314. I'm about to go join him to do some streaming. So first of all, if you're not following us on Twitter, you would have known about it when it actually happened. Now you'd have to, if you're interested, go and watch the VOD on Twitch. On Dave's Switch, and you should definitely go check that out. And even if we're not there, you should just go watch his stuff and follow him. Tonight we're going to be playing some games that I've never played before. So
I will not be.
Just
Joe this
just
time.
me. But yeah, Amy will actually be able to catch up on some sleep for once. Because God knows that just doesn't happen for us sometimes. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I want to know your opinions on anything and everything that we talked about. What was your... Again, like I said, 10 through 6.
Right.
Save your 5 through 1 for next week.
Right.
But
we want to know what your top 10 is.
Yes.
Maybe it's completely different from ours.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us why.
Yeah. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why that's super important?
Maybe there were certain points that we made in this episode specifically, or even in this episode and the specific episode of JaAR that the story was referring to, and you completely disagree with something that we have to say, and you have a really meaningful reason behind why you disagree with that.
Yeah.
We would love to hear that.
Correct.
We actually care about that stuff.
So please let us know. And like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been our year-end closeout,
Yes.
10 through 6, part 1
Yes.
of 2, for the top 10 MTG stories of the year 2018. This has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. This has been a great year of you joining us in showing off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
So like I said, hop in the comments and do that with us as well.
Thank you.
I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.